chapter 17, verses 26 through 29, and in Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39, we read that men are going to eat and drink, marry and give in marriage in the last days, right up until the coming of the Son of Man, even as they ate and drank and married and gave in marriage in the days of Noah, right up until the time the flood came and destroyed the entire earth. Now, in our days, it is commonly taught and commonly believed that these two passages indicate that the church is going to enjoy a time of relative ease and comfort prior to the rapture, and that we're not going to see any significantly hard times prior to the rapture. Is this correct? Stay tuned. Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd. Welcome to Soothkeep and another edition of Prophecy in the Crucible. My mission is truth. Truth at any cost. Truth above every other consideration. Now, good things happen when hearts are excited about God's revealed truth. It brings clarity, it brings discernment, and it brings blessing to the work of God. Indeed, every revival in church history boils down to one thing: hearts set on fire by God's eternal truth. Now, the truth that we're looking at today is the truth that God's attempting to reveal to us in these two passages on the state of mankind at the time of the coming of the Son of Man. And we're going to look in particular at Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 29. So let's start by reading it. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married, they gave in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot. They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Now, the first question that we face when we come to this passage is whether this passage is addressing the rapture or the second coming. Personally, I believe that all of the coming of the Son of Man passages in the Gospels are referring directly and immediately to the second coming. Indeed, the vast majority of the prophetic material in the Gospels pertains to Israel in the tribulation and to the second coming. The mystery of the church was not revealed until Paul received his revelation from heaven a number of years later and recorded it in the epistles. Now, however, there are passages in the Gospels which do address the rapture aspect of the second coming. Does anyone deny, for instance, that John chapter 14, verses 1 through 3 is a rapture passage? And if we agree that this is a rapture passage, that it can only be a rapture passage, then we are agreed, right, that the door is open for other passages in the Gospels to directly and immediately present the rapture. Isn't this the case? But the fact is, we don't have to decide that Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 29, or Matthew 24, verses 37 through 39, refer specifically to the church and the rapture to utilize these passages for insight on the circumstances that surround the rapture. Notice that the principle behind all of the watching and waiting and evangelizing in serving passages and deliverance passages in the Gospels, these principles all apply to the rapture of the church, even though they're primarily and directly addressed to the second coming and Israel. Now, think about this for a minute. We're not wrong if we apply all the watching and waiting passages to the church, even when these passages are clearly addressed to Israel. And we're not wrong if we apply all the evangelizing and serving passages to the church, even though they were primarily and directly addressed to Israel. And likewise, we're not wrong to apply the deliverance passages to the church, even though they were directly addressed to the people and nation of Israel. Now, as for the passage that's at hand, which is Luke 17, verses 26 through 29, the example of Noah fits both the rapture and the second coming. The church is going to go up in the heavenly ark to escape the tribulation, and Israel, or the Jewish remnant, is going to go through the tribulation on the tribulation ark, but both of them are going to enter in their arks at about the same time. God returns to the nation of Israel very shortly, maybe immediately, after he takes the church out of the world. And as far as the Lot's example goes, the church fleeing immediately before the string of destructive visitations and judgments of the 70th week starts fits in just as well with the principle of deliverance as Israel fleeing in the very day of the Lord when the fire falls from heaven and completely decimates the earth in one day. The morning star flight of the church at the rapture is just as much a deliverance in the spirit of Lot as the sunrise flight of the Jewish remnant in the day of the Lord. They're distinct in their time and their details, but they're exactly the same in their principle. God delivers his people. Well, let's look at the theme of Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 29. And to do so, let's ask three questions. Number one, is the theme relative ease and comfort? Or is the theme going about life oblivious to your moral bankruptcy and to the judgment that's hanging over the world like a Damoclean sword? And two, does this passage require the church in the rapture interpretation because the state of affairs here is incompatible with the tribulation? And three, does this passage require a rapture prior to hard times because the state of affairs is incompatible with a rapture in hard times? So how are we going to answer these three questions? Well, there's three sources of data that we can look to get our answer. We can look at contextual clues right in the passage itself, and we can look at other passages in the Bible, and we can take up the question of a consistent application to the entire church in our day. Well, let's start with the contextual clues that are in the passage itself. I want you to notice that nothing is stated in this passage that suggests or implies relative ease and comfort, though that may well have been the case, indeed probably was the case, for many of those that lived in the days of Noah or in the days of Lot. And notice too that God gave us the indicators that he was focused on in this passage. And these indicators are just as true in hard times as they are in easy times. And there's four couplets here. The first one is eating and drinking. Do you stop eating and drinking in times of war and disaster? No. Your dietary intake might be affected significantly. Are people going to stop eating and drinking in the 70th week? No. They're not going to stop eating and drinking in the first half of the 70th week, and they're not going to stop eating and drinking in the second half of the 70th week. They're not going to stop eating and drinking right on the verge of Armageddon. How about buying and selling? Are folks going to stop buying and selling during the 70th week? Absolutely not. We are plainly told that during the second half of the 70th week, the world is going to be unable to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. So you see, they're still buying and selling. They're still eating and drinking. The wheels of the world are still turning. Now, they may not be turning as fast as they used to. It may be a little bit harder to keep those wheels turning, but they're still turning. How about planting and building? Are folks going to stop planting and building during the 70th week? No. Folks, do you recall, right, that the temple is going to be built during the 70th week? Men will still have jobs. The wheels of the world are going to still be turning. I like the example of London during the bombing raid in World War II. Did the wheels turn more slowly during the bombing raid? Yes, they did. Did they stop turning? No, they did not. How about marrying and giving in marriage? Did people stop marrying and giving in marriage in war-torn England during World War II? No, they did not. How about during the bombing campaign in London when the Germans were bombing the daylights out of the British? Did they stop marrying and giving in marriage? No, they did not. What you have to understand is that people get, well, let me say it this way. They get inured to hardship. They make adjustments and life goes on. The wheels continue to turn. The wheels of life continue to turn. The wheels of the world continue to turn. They might turn slower. It may be harder to make them turn, but the wheels keep on turning. Folks, during the bombing of London, the wheels kept turning. The taverns, many of them were still open. People were still going to the movies and watching the latest movies, and they were watching the newsreel updates on what's going on in World War II. Likewise, in the last days, the wheels of the world are going to still continue turning despite all the disasters and visitations that are coming on the world from heaven. And the world is not going to respond like Nineveh did at the preaching of Jonah. The world is going to respond like it did in the days of Noah. In other words, they're not going to respond at all. Now, the second set of information that we can look at that throws light on this is other biblical testimony. Let's look at Revelation chapter 11, verses 7 through 10. And there we see that a beast is going to ascend out of the abyss and make war against the two witnesses and kill them. And notice in verse 10 that the entire planet celebrates and sends gifts one to another. Did you catch that? Did you catch that this is party time? And did you notice that there's still mail service or at least courier service? This is not a complete breakdown of the world. This is the world still keeping those wheels turning. Though it may be harder, though it may be more difficult, though the wheels may be turning slower, man is shaking his fist at God in heaven and keeping those wheels turning. Now, notice too that this celebration here, it's either just a few days before 3.5 years into the tribulation, or it's just a few days before the end of the tribulation. And either one of these two locations, there's partying, there's celebration, and there's package delivery service. So this is an absolutely devastating argument that Luke 17, 26 through 29 can't be limited to the rapture. It just can't be. If men can be celebrating and partying, and there's still courier service and mail service 3.5 years or 7 years into the tribulation, then there shouldn't be any problem thinking of men eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and buying and selling and building and planting. Again, I bring up the example of London during the bombing raids in World War II. Life went on. The wheels kept churning. Now, things were hard. Things were difficult. The wheel was probably turning slower, but they still had mail service. They still had taverns open. They still had stores open. They still watched movies. They still married and gave in marriage. Now, the third consideration on our understanding and application of this passage is that we need a consistent application. So let's start with a question. Who's going to go up? Let's say if the rapture just happened today or tomorrow or next week. Who's going to go up in the rapture in relative ease and comfort? Just the Americans? Maybe some of the South Americans? Maybe some of the Europeans? What about the rest of the world? Like right now, folks, Europe is facing the most harsh winter circumstances they have faced since World War II. Not only is there an energy shortage, they're short on electricity and they're short on oil for heating. But the oil and electricity prices are going through the roof. That doesn't look like ease and comfort to me. And how about places like China and North Korea and Islamic nations like Iran? The Christians in these places do not face ease and comfort. They face serious trials. Folks, if they can go up in the rapture out of the midst of poverty and hardship and persecution and imprisonment and beatings and torture, then we can go up in the midst of the same. The American trial of ease and comfort could well come to a screeching halt in the next few weeks, next few months, the next year or so, and be replaced by a trial of hardship and persecution that we haven't seen in America since the 1600s. So let's bring this to a conclusion. The church being raptured in circumstances of relative ease and comfort can't be the meaning of this passage. Nothing in the context demands that. In fact, most of the couplets, like eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, are undeniably going on during the 70th week. And none of these couplets are inconceivable during the 70th week, not even marrying and giving in marriage. I am convinced that the meaning that God is trying to convey here in Luke 17, verses 26 through 29, is the hardness and the blindness of the human heart. The wheel of life, the wheel of the world is going to continue to turn, maybe slowly, maybe a little bit harder to keep it turning, but it's going to continue turning, despite all the visitations and judgments that should awaken them. And despite the threat of absolute judgment that's hanging over their head. And they are going about business as usual instead of repenting in sackcloth and ashes. So they are like the world in Noah's day rather than like the citizens of Nineveh in Jonah's day. And the signs of certain destruction will be written on the wall of the world just as clearly as Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upsarsin was written on the wall of Belshazzar's banquet hall. There will be zero excuse for them being oblivious to what's happening around them, to the real significance of what's going on, to the judgment that's coming. Men are going to be just as drunk in the last days with Babylonian wine as they were drunk with Babylonian wine in Belshazzar's banquet hall. And the sin here is being spiritually oblivious to the signs of the times and the sudden destruction that's going to befall the entire world in one day. So folks, keep watching. We've got no guarantee that we're going to go up in ease and comfort. We might. We might here in America. We might luck out. But we've got no guarantee. We've got no guarantee that the next few months, next couple years, we're not going to see persecution that will equal or exceed what's been seen in Australia and New Zealand and England and Canada. We might go beyond that and see the kind of persecution that's happening in China. We have no guarantees. Eyes wide open. Brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.